Hello. So we're moving on to chapter 12. We're nearing the end of the class. Chapter 12 deals with quest heroes. So these are heroes that go on some sort of quest. Perseus is one of the heroes. Hercules certainly fits as a quest hero because he travels around and has his adventures. The chief focus here is on the figure of Odysseus, who is the hero of Homer's Odyssey. Now, Odysseus is one of the heroes in the Trojan War. He is actually a supporting character in Homer's Iliad. He has a few key scenes that are where he does like a brief starring role in a couple of key spots. But his main story is his travel back to Ithaca. So for him, the quest, right? So quest stories, if you remember Prop, right? Quest stories are all about being sent on some sort of mission. In Odysseus's case, his mission is get home. Right? That's his mission. That's his goal. That's his quest. And the Odyssey is about that. In fact, the word Odyssey has come to pretty much mean that. On the way, he has all sorts of adventures. And the Odyssey, which is quite different than the Iliad. So the Iliad is basically a tragic work. It's not a tragedy, but it has a tragic tone to it. Right? It is a poem, as a war poem would be, about mortality. Both Hector, who dies in the poem, and Patroclus, who dies in the poem, and Achilles, who knows he's going to die soon after the adventures of the poem. Right? He's still alive at the end of the poem. They're all focused on the fact that he's going to die. He's going to die young. He will be famous, but life is very important to the Greeks. And when you're dead, they have no guarantee there's really an afterlife. And the image we have of the afterlife in the Odyssey is it's basically a gray world, sort of like what, as a Catholic growing up, what limbo is always imagined to be. It's not a place of pain, but it's basically boring. And one of the people that Odysseus sees in the underworld is he sees Orion, and Orion is hunting the ghost of an animal that he killed. And it's like, well, he's a ghost and he's chasing a ghost, and it's like, what's the point, right? I mean, the point of hunting is the thrill of the hunt, right? That it's a matter of life and death for the animal and for the hunter, right? If you're going out against big game, it's very well it's quite possible that the game itself might kill you if you're not careful. So that's all missing, right? If you're both ghosts and already dead, you're going through some empty motion. So the sections that we see in by Maurizio that she excerpts are from Book 10, where Odysseus deals with the sorceress Circe, and Book 11, where he travels to the edge of the world where he can meet these ghosts. He doesn't actually go to the underworld, but he does see underworld figures because the ghosts sort of rise up. And remember, the Greeks think that the world is basically a sphere. The earth part is the center, and it's a disk. Above it is the sky, which is imagined to be a solid mass. And the bowl is the underworld. So if you travel to the edge of the world where the river ocean is, then that's where the underworld is going to be closest to reality, right? Because it's going to be where the sky and the underworld sort of meet. So that seems to be why that's sort of picked as the location. And we get, we see some of the people that he meets. We don't get the whole scene, but we get some of it. The key thing is it's a gray existence. There doesn't seem to be any strong judgment. Like, you don't undergo a trial. You're not, sentenced to hell. There are some really bad sinners who end up in the equivalent of hell. But everyone else basically lives in this gray world, and it doesn't matter if you're Achilles, whom Odysseus meets, or Agamemnon, whom he also meets. Now, Agamemnon's not quite the hero that Achilles is, and maybe Agamemnon deserves to be in this gray world, but Achilles sort of deserves better, as being a much better, greater hero and all that. Doesn't matter. They're both in the same boat. All right, so that's that that's that bit. So the scholarship deals with a piece by W.H. Auden, who was a famous English poet of the 20th century, on the quest hero. And he mentions that there are 6 characteristics of the quest hero. And basically, they're what do you think? There has to be sort of like something that the hero is going for, right? So for it to be a quest hero, he's on a mission, he's going to get something. He's going to encounter troubles. He's going to have various adventures on the way. It's not going to be one big story, but it's going to be a lot of like little adventures. There are going to be people trying to keep him from getting the object. There are going to be helpers that give him stuff to help him, achieve his goal. And if you look at the Odyssey, this is sort of clear, right? Odysseus' crew really gets in the way of his getting home because of stuff they do. And one might argue that Odysseus should have been, knowing his men, he should have been a little bit sharper than he was, and kept the men better in line. He takes some actions, like the Cyclops episode, that's pretty much on Odysseus. If he had followed the advice of his men, they would have got out of there unscathed. Instead, 6 guys got killed. But there were some other things that are not Odysseus' fault, but again, maybe he should have known better, and because he didn't take certain actions, bad stuff happens to his men. But the big block for Odysseus is that when he gets home, there are the suitors who want to marry Penelope. Obviously, they are not going to welcome him home because this is their way to a crown, and Odysseus, if he shows up, they're going to kill him. They're going to try to do it before he gets recognized, because that way they can claim, well, we didn't know it was Odysseus when we killed him. We thought he was just some interloper. Odysseus has to do stuff different in the Odyssey. He has to be a different type of hero. He's got to be more patient. He's got to rely on his intelligence more so than the force. So, moving on to the comparison. Once again, we have Gilgamesh, and once again, we have the Aeneid. So here we've got Gilgamesh's trip to the edge of the world where Utnapishtim lives. Now, Utnapishtim is the mortal who survived the flood in the Babylonian Mesopotamian story, and as a reward, he was given immortality by the gods. After Gilgamesh sees his friend die, he sees Enkidu die, and he basically wastes away, right? He comes down with an illness and he wastes away, so it's not a heroic death. He's so grossed out by that he is determined that's not going to happen to him, so he goes to Utnapishtim to find the secret of immortality. Basically, there is no secret of immortality. I mean, Utnapishtim really doesn't have anything that he can give him. He does give him a plant that will prolong his life and keep him young for a fairly long time, but so it's basically some sort of like vitamin supplement. It won't make him immortal, which is what he wants, and he loses that anyway. So the message is, it's foolish to wish for immortality because mortals cannot be immortal. And Gilgamesh, to be a hero, has to die. I mean, a hero who doesn't die is not really a hero. He's something else. Aeneas goes to the underworld, and he actually goes to the underworld. He goes underground. He crosses the river Styx. He does all that stuff. He goes and this is modeled directly on the Odyssey, right? So there are scenes that are not exact copies, but they're sort of reworkings of what happens in the Odyssey, where Odysseus meets the ghosts. But Odysseus went to see Tiresias, who is a prophet, who can give him some information which might help him in his journey home. Actually, the information that he gives, only some of it helps. There are some things that Odysseus is able to avoid because of the information that Tiresias gives. There's other information that is not particularly helpful that Tiresias gives. Aeneas doesn't go to the underworld to see some prophet. He goes to see his own father who has died, right? So Anchises has died already, and This is about a year or so after his death, and he goes to he has a vision of his father. Come see me, son, and so he then travels to the underworld to see him. This shows pietas, that sense of devotion that is typical of Aeneas, right? This is his chief virtue, pietas, a sense of duty. He does what he's supposed to do with regard to the state. He does what he's supposed to do with regard to the gods. He does what he's supposed to do with regard to family. So he goes to see his father's ghost, which is sort of heroic. I mean, going to the underworld is a big deal. And so doing that to see dad really shows some devotion on the part of Aeneas. But the big thing for Aeneas, and this is a big thing just in general, is when Virgil was not hired, but when Virgil was sort of encouraged in his desire to write an epic poem, Maecenas, who was sort of a rich guy who was a friend of Augustus, and he sponsored a lot of poets, Maecenas hoped that Virgil would write, and maybe Augustus hoped that Virgil would write an epic poem about Augustus. Basically a historical epic. And there are historical epics. I mean, the oldest epic in Latin that was not a copy of Greek stuff is a historical epic called the Annales. We don't have it. We just have quotes from it. But it was a poem by a guy named Aeneas. So there is some historical background for Virgil writing a historical epic. He chose not to do that. He chose to write an epic about the aftermath of the Trojan War, connecting the Trojan War with the founding of Rome. Right? So that's the key thing. What he does throughout the work, he does it two times mainly. One is here, where he tells, he has Aeneas go to the underworld. He sees his father Anchises, and Anchises takes him to the river Lethe, the river of forgetfulness. And the ancients who believed in reincarnation believed that the dead, after some period of time, drank from the river Lethe, and then those spirits were reborn, right? So it's reincarnation. Using that as a basis, we've got Aeneas able to see the future heroes of Rome who are still ghosts in the underworld, because it's a 1,000-year period. So there are a few dead Trojans from 1,000 years before who are just about to be born. And then there are others that are, of course, have recently died who will become heroes at the time of Augustus, right? So he sees all of these, and they're already looking like they're the people they're going to become. So Aeneas gets to see a preview of Roman history, right? So that's a key thing. In Book 8, Aeneas gets a shield that has on it scenes from Roman history. So these two scenes allow Virgil to have Roman history in his poem without it being historical epic. So it's sort of I think a pretty brilliant way of doing things. But it does show Aeneas as a hero of Rome rather than a personal hero like Odysseus or Achilles. The Greek heroes are much more personal. They're much more focused on themselves. Aeneas is much more focused on his part in Roman destiny. All right, and the last thing, the Nachleben here looks once again like the Medea chapter did on African American experience. So here, Odysseus sort of as a figure in African American thought. Now, I've got Romar Beardsley's name here. Romar Beardsley was an artist. He mainly did collages, or those are what he's best known for, and he did a series of collages to illustrate an edition of the Odyssey. And this imagines Odysseus as a black man, and like Circe's Island is more like Haiti or Jamaica. So Beardsley, they're beautiful illustrations. There's one in the book. You'll see it, and if you look up on Google, you can actually see a bunch of the pictures from the book. I've never actually seen the book itself that these are illustrations in, but Beardsley, an important African American artist in the 20th century. There's also a poem about a man named Big Boy who travels around, the South and to get to in the North, I think, to get employment. And this is sort of typical of the African American experience. There was the Great Migration from the South to the North that happened in the early 20th century. That is often compared to Exodus from the Bible, and then of course the fact that African American men, especially because of the way society is structured, often can't. They're either not encouraged to find steady work, or they simply can't because the opportunities aren't there. So what they do is they travel around to find what opportunities they can. That, of course, makes them a figure like Odysseus, who's always traveling. Okay, so that covers this this chapter. So we've only got one more chapter to go, though. So there'll only be one more, I think, of these lectures. We're coming sort of to the end of the term. So keep up the work. You do have your Odyssey. You do have your Aeneid paper that's coming up. It's not coming up immediately, but if you haven't really started reading the Aeneid, the essential Aeneid, make sure you do. And my suggestion is you look at the essay questions, decide which one you're going to do, and then as you're reading, jot down some key things that are going to help you in writing your paper.